Most people think Gen X had a simple childhood. Less technology, less pressure, more freedom. They usually assume that meant it was easier. But psychology suggests something different. It may not have been simple. It may have been independence arriving earlier than expected. Some childhoods are structured, guided, closely observed. Others are quieter, less supervised, more open. Gen X childhood often looked like the second type, not chaotic, not neglected in an obvious way, but noticeably independent. Time was often spent outside, or alone at home, figuring things out without constant input. There were fewer check-ins, fewer explanations, fewer detailed conversations about emotions. Decisions were made early, mistakes were handled quietly, and learning happened through experience, more than instruction. From the outside, this looked like freedom. And in many ways, it was. But underneath that freedom, there was something else forming. A habit of handling things alone, not loudly, not consciously, just consistently. This pattern didn't appear randomly. It developed through environment. During that time, daily life was changing. More households had working parents. Schedules were busier. Time was more divided, which meant children had more unsupervised space, not as a strategy, but as a reality. There was also a different communication style, less explanation, more expectation. Be back before dark, figure it out, handle it. These weren't harsh instructions, they were normal. At the same time, there were fewer external influences. No constant internet, no social media comparison, no endless stream of opinions. So experiences were local, limited to immediate surroundings. This created a unique balance. On one side, freedom, movement, independence. On the other, less emotional guidance, less visible support systems. And over time, this balance shaped behavior, not in dramatic ways, but in quiet patterns. Not as a belief, but as a default response. Over time, this creates a specific psychological structure. Psychologically, early independence changes how the mind adapts. When guidance is limited, the brain learns to self-manage. Problems are processed internally. Decisions are made individually. Emotions are handled privately. This builds self-reliance, but it also builds distance from external support. Because when someone learns early that you handle things on your own, that pattern stabilizes, not as a belief, but as a default response. Over time, this creates a specific psychological structure. Externally, capable, calm, independent. Internally, reserved processing, controlled expression, selective openness. It's not suppression in an obvious sense. It's efficiency. The mind filters what needs to be shared and what can be handled alone. At the same time, there's less dependency on validation, because decisions were never constantly reviewed. They were simply made and lived with. This creates confidence, but also a reduced habit of seeking reassurance, which, in modern environments, can look unusual. In adulthood, these patterns show up quietly. In conversations, there is often less emotional detail, not because it doesn't exist, but because it isn't always expressed. In challenges, there is a tendency to solve first and share later, or sometimes not share at all. In relationships, independence remains strong. Space feels natural. Self-sufficiency feels normal. Even support, when available, is not always immediately used. At work, this can look like reliability, handling responsibilities without needing constant direction. In social settings, it can look like calm observation, listening more than speaking, engaging but not over-explaining. These are not random traits. They are continuations of earlier patterns, formed gradually, repeated over time, now operating automatically. At a deeper level, this is not just about independence. It's about adaptation. The environment did not provide constant structure, so the individual became the structure. The environment did not offer continuous emotional processing, so emotions became internal processes. This creates strength, but also a certain self-containment. And self-containment can be misunderstood. From the outside, it may look like distance or lack of openness, but internally, it's simply familiarity. A system that has always worked this way. There is also less urgency, less need to constantly explain or update others, because stability is internal, not external. This is why Gen X often appears steady, even in uncertain situations. Not because uncertainty isn't felt, but because reacting outwardly was never the default pattern. Stability is internal, not external. This does not need to be fixed. It needs to be understood. Because what looks like emotional distance may actually be learned independence. What looks like silence may simply be internal processing. And what looks like detachment may be control. Different environments create different patterns. And Gen X childhood created a very specific one: quiet, self-reliant, and internally structured. Not better, not worse, just different.